Good morning, everyone. My name is Lindsay Greising, and I'm a staff attorney at the Advocates for Human Rights. Today, I'm going to talk to you about an opportunity to comment on Department of Homeland Security regulations, which impact T visas, which are the visas for victims of human trafficking. So let's first talk about what regulations are and what it means to comment. As you may know, our government is designed with 3 governmental branches and then a 4th branch, which is the people, as a check on the powers. Our Congress creates legislation, and then that legislation is implemented through the executive or the presidential branch through regulations or policies. The judiciary can then analyze legislation or executive actions for its legality, and then the people can serve as a check on those powers by voting. So when we're talking about regulations, we're talking about legislation that Congress passed and the way that the executive or the president is implementing that legislation. So what are regulations? They are binding formal standards for how the agency implements legislation. The executive generally must request, review, and respond to comments by the public or interested parties before it finalizes rules, also known as regulations. There are some exceptions to this, but generally we will have the executive issue a notice for rulemaking and then provide a comment period for people to provide those comments. And then at the end of that comment period, it's required to review all of those comments and respond to them before issuing a final rule or a final regulation that becomes this binding formal standard for how it will implement the legislation. There are also other types of executive actions that involve how it implements legislation or does its job through policy. I'm only talking today about the regulations. When we have regulations, anyone can submit comments on them, and there's no specific format required. I'll talk more about this as we go through. So why is commenting important? It's an opportunity for you to raise your voice and also raise concerns. So the executive is filled with folks who are experts on certain areas, but by opening comments for regulations really gives you an opportunity to talk about issues that you've either seen or that you want the executive to consider when it's developing its regulations, because it may not be aware of certain issues, or it may be aware of them and not know or need to know how important those issues are for a large number of people. So it's a great way for you to let your voice be heard in support or in opposition of certain issues you care about. And it also creates a record of concerns or comments that can be used for future litigation. So if there is a case brought to that judicial branch, like we talked about at the beginning, about the legality or the process for how those regulations are being implemented, the courts can look back at the comments that the executive received to help inform its decision there. So with that in mind, let's talk about this specific opportunity. So the Department of Homeland Security, which is the large department that oversees a lot of our immigration processes, is opening comments on the regulations related to how it processes T visas. So what are T visas? They are a non-immigrant visa for victims of trafficking, which allow the person to remain in the United States for up to 4 years and then provides them a path to a green card. So this is really the visa or the status that helps protect victims of trafficking. It was created by the Trafficking Victims Protection Act and its reauthorization. So that's the congressional legislative piece that's creating this basis through which the executive is implementing its regulations or creating its regulations. And in the TVPA or the TVPRA, the purposes for creating this T visa are to support or protect non-citizen victims of trafficking. So Congress recognized that victims of human trafficking deserve and need protections and support, and that that's something that the United States has agreed is a priority of ours, both through our signing on to the Palermo Protocol, an international treaty, as well as through implementing this TVPA. A secondary purpose, or maybe a primary purpose, but a second reason for creating the legislation is to encourage non-citizen victims of trafficking to report and cooperate with law enforcement without fear of immigration consequences. So Congress saw that a lot of victims of trafficking who were not citizens felt fearful of cooperating with law enforcement or reporting crimes, either because of real or perceived threats of deportation or threats of immigration consequences. And so in creating the T visa, a purpose was to be able to give law enforcement a tool with which it could keep citizens or non-citizens in the United States to help with those investigations and also alleviate some of those concerns. So in this instance, we already have existing T visa regulations. There was an interim final rule that was issued by DHS in 2016, 2017. And that's the regulation that has been used for the past 4 years in implementing or providing T visas. Because it was an interim final rule, the Department of Homeland Security is now seeking to create a final rule, and in doing so, it's reopening the comment period. So these T visa regulations describe who is eligible for a T visa as a victim of trafficking. They outline the application requirements and the process for applying for a T visa. They detail who might be eligible as a derivative of an applicant, so a family member who might be able to get status as a family member of a person who is a victim of trafficking. They also detail who is barred from eligibility and any waivers that might be available for those bars. They detail which law enforcement agencies can sign endorsements in support of T visas. And then they also outline the process for adjustment of status for T non-immigrants. The current regulations also do some additional things and provide additional information, but the focus of our presentation today and really what we think impacts our clients the most are these issues. So what are some of the things about which the advocates is commenting and would encourage others to mention? One big one is bars to T visa eligibility for people who are removed. So because the T visa regulations create standards for who is eligible for T visas, one of the bars is for people who cannot show that they're in the US on account of their trafficking. And the current regulations say that anyone who has been removed or deported can't show that except for within narrow exceptions. So our model comment and our comment provide information about that to the Department of Homeland Security, encouraging them to remove this bar. We're also encouraging them to provide employment authorization while a T visa application is pending. At the time that the prior regulations were finalized or provided, there was about a 6-month wait for T visas to be processed. And so DHS decided not to provide any path to getting an employment authorization document because people would generally just be able to get their employment authorization through an approved T visa. The wait time now is at least 2 years. And so we are providing a comment suggesting that DHS make a way for people to have an employment authorization card while they're waiting, in recognition of the fact that not having employment authorization creates a lot of opportunity for being re-victimized or being re-trafficked as people try to survive and navigate 2 years without employment authorization. We're also looking for additional protections for people who are in removal proceedings who are victims of trafficking or their derivatives. So because the T visa can only be processed by the Department of Homeland Security and not by an immigration judge, people who are in deportation proceedings, many of whom are placed there because of retaliatory actions by their trafficker, are really vulnerable to being removed. And then we run into this issue of people being barred from then getting a T visa who have been removed. So we are encouraging DHS to provide some additional protections that would make sure that people who are in removal proceedings who are victims of trafficking, make sure that they're not removed improperly. We also are thankful for a lot of the protections that are currently available for minors who are victims of trafficking, but we're suggesting some additional protections and clarifications of those protections. And then we're supporting the changes in the regulation that allowed state and local law enforcement agencies to use the T visa as a tool for their investigations of trafficking by signing endorsements. And we're encouraging DHS to make sure that it maintains any protections in the final regulations that recognize the fact that state and local law enforcement agencies, not just federal agencies, play a huge role in investigating and responding to trafficking. So these are kind of the big ones that you will see in the model comment that's linked on our website, and that's also linked in this document. But you, of course, are welcome to comment on anything that you think is important. If you're a victim of trafficking or you work with trafficking victims, and you have something else you want to bring up, you certainly can. This is just a few of the things that the advocates have found to be really important. So to learn more about this opportunity, you can find the regulations. So this is a slightly confusing because there's a 2016 regulation and then the new 2021 reopening of comments. So to look at how the regulations are written and what you might want to keep or change, you'll be looking at that kind of older regulation or interim final rule, and then the 2021 opportunity to recomment is there as well. So the docket number is USCIS 2011-0010. You can also find it by looking at document number 2021-14992. And then this is a link to the Federal Register where you can also find the regulation and the opportunity for comments. So with that in mind, how do you comment? As I said, there's no specific format, but we would recommend that you personalize your comment as much as possible. So we have a model comment, which you can find on our website at theadvocatesforhumanrights.org by clicking on Get Involved and then Take Action. You can also find it by clicking on this model comment link. And including personalized information is the best way to comment. We've added in our model comment some areas and suggestions of how you might do that. You could also create your own comment. There's no requirement that you follow our model comment. It just provides some examples and some information in the hopes of making it somewhat easier for you to submit a comment. And then share that with your networks. We want people who have information about this to comment. Some things you should include. You should include why you are interested in who you are. So your personal background or professional interests, anything that, any experience you've had with trafficking that helps kind of inform why you're making this comment. So if you've taken on a pro bono case with us, for example, and you have experience with how the T visa works, you should provide that. If you're a social worker who works with trafficking victims and you've seen pros and cons of the way that the regulations are implemented, or have ideas about things that aren't in the regs that really matter to you, provide that. You should provide a quick summary of your top concerns or suggestions just for ease, and then go into detailing an outline of your comments and suggestions. So We would encourage you to include references to regulation number or statute if you have it. It's not required, but it can help DHS in finalizing its rule. If you have data or other evidence like a report or information that you have within your organization, that can be really useful. And then again, personalizing the information. As noted, there's no specific format that you need to follow. This is not a brief written for the court that must be double spaced and a certain number of pages. The comments can be handwritten or typed as a letter or in a more formal brief document. It can be really whatever you're most comfortable with. This particular opportunity requires that comments be submitted online, and I will be providing a link to where to do that in these materials. Our model comment also links to that. Any length is acceptable, and you can, but you're not required to sign your comment. And then you'll also, when you go to the online system, be required to provide some information about yourself. So as mentioned, you will want to refer to DHS docket number USCIS 2011-001 or CIS number 250711. And DHS is asking that you submit comments only online. So that will be done through regulations.gov. And if you click on the link at the beginning of this show that is actually to the regulation, it will just immediately direct you to regulations.gov. But otherwise, you can go to regulations.gov, put in this docket number, and then it will let you submit. And you should also reference the docket number in your comment. You can direct your comments to Elizabeth Dallum at this address, 20 Massachusetts Avenue Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20529-2099. They do not want you to submit comments by paper, only online. So you should not send anything to Elizabeth Dallum, but you can reference her in your comment. And then if you have questions specifically for DHS or issues submitting online, you can call 202-272-8377. And the government must receive your document no later than September 14th of this year. So since you're submitting online, you can do it, of course, on September 14th, but make sure you get your information in by then. And then if you have any questions that the advocates can help with, you can contact me at lgreising@advrights.org. Thanks so much, and we hope that this is a great opportunity for folks to share their concerns and really finalize regulations that provide the greatest amount of protections for trafficking victims.